Oh, hello. It looks like I haven't posted in a little while, and that's because I had nothing to read from because I had no new series coming out. But look at this. I have an advanced review copy of my new book, which is just as new to me as it is to you, probably, since all my ghostwriters have, um, since it's been a while since I read it. So let me read from a few chapters, just like I do with my other series, and maybe you'll be interested enough to read the whole book. Who knows? Who even knows? So this is a spin-off. It's called Once Upon Another Time. Spin-off to Half Upon a Time, as well as a sequel series. It's not starring the same characters, so if you haven't read the first series, you don't need to. This will be you'll be able to jump right into this. It will help to know like some of the Easter eggs and stuff though. So if you have read the first series, you're going to see a lot of uh, familiar topics. So chapter one: Once Upon Another Time. Lena held her breath as she slipped beneath a door that was easily 100 feet tall, and caught sight of the giant, snoring loudly in the kitchen as a fire flickered in the dim light. The wooden chair he lounged in looked like it could barely hold his weight, and it creaked with every tiny movement. Hopefully that creaking would cover any sound she made, since she knew that if the giant woke up before she could find her treasure, this was all over. Fortunately, even at 5.5 feet tall, taller than the average human 12-year-old, she still measured barely a tenth of the giant's height, so her footsteps were basically silent. Unfortunately, the item she was after was currently sitting in the giant's tunic pocket, and now is going to present some problems. Something large and fuzzy pushed into her from behind, and she absently reached back to scratch her cat, Rufus, beneath his floppy feathered hat. Rufus himself was about the size of a horse, a few inches taller than Lena when sitting on his haunches, but he moved more quietly than she did, even with his boots on, assuming he wanted to. To Lena's disappointment, he didn't seem to want to. "We are in the food room, but do not eat?" the long-haired tabby cat asked too loudly for Lena's comfort. "This makes no sense to Rufus." "Shh, little man," she said, wondering if she should remove his magical hat for now, since that was what gave him the ability to speak in her language. But if she did, he wouldn't understand her either, and that could get them in trouble. "I'll get you a treat later, okay? Right now we need to get up there." She pointed at the giant's chest, slowly rising and falling with every snore. Rufus's whiskers twitched. "Two treats?" She smiled in spite of the tension. "Sure, two treats. But now we're going to be quiet, okay? No waking him up." Rufus blinked and crept forward at her side, hopefully getting the message. She had toyed with the idea of leaving him behind, but in the event she needed to make a quick escape, the 7 league boots on her cat's feet would make all the difference. Not that she knew exactly how far a league was, but the boots let their wearer leap great distances in seconds, and that was good enough for her. 7 league boots are like a classic fairy tale magical item, um, and they basically do exactly what she just said. So it's basically an enormous giant cat wearing boots. I don't know if that rings any bells. Plus, alongside his floppy translating hat, they just made Rufus look so fancy. The wooden floor of the giant's house had enough cracks in it to make Lena have to carefully pick her way over to the kitchen chair, and she didn't have any time to waste. Even if the giant didn't wake up, his wife might be home soon, and then Lena would be caught instantly. And slowly making her way across the kitchen floor was taking far too long. "Can you carry me up to the kitchen table, little man?" she whispered to Rufus and climbed up on his back. He twitched his whiskers in response, then took off at a silent run, even with his boots. This is not copy edited in this version, so there might be some errors, so just forgive me on if things don't sound right. But instead of going toward the table as requested, he ran for a broom leaning against the nearby wall. "No, over here," Lena whispered in his ear, leaning forward as she pointed back toward the table. But Rufus didn't seem to hear. He made a great leap straight at the broom. He hit it hard and kicked off, sending them flying in the direction of the table, though still too low to reach it. Instead, they landed hard on one of the kitchen chairs, only long enough for Rufus to catch his balance and take off again, leaping back and forth between the backs of two chairs to take them higher and higher. Finally, they reached the top of the kitchen table, and Rufus skidded to a stop, almost throwing Lena straight over his head. She managed to hold on, then slowly dismounted, scratching her good boy behind his ears for doing so well. Okay, sure, Rufus wasn't the most graceful cat ever. She'd seen him fall off perfectly level fences twice as wide as he was, but he always tried his best, and that was all she could ever ask. He purred as he looked over at her, clearly proud of himself. "Three treats?" he said, and Lena quickly looked up at the giant to see if he'd heard, but another snore told her that they were still safe. She shushed her cat again, but nodded, smiling a bit. He purred again as he followed her over toward the giant's arm that rested on the table. Rufus had landed them relatively close to it, which was good, because she didn't know how much longer they'd had before the giant's wife returned. Lena tried to move as quickly as possible, as while staying silent, and finally reached his elbow. The giant's tunic was loose enough for her to climb, so she grabbed a handful of fabric and easily pulled herself up to stand on top of his forearm. Rufus prepared himself for a leap to reach the same level, but she quickly shook her head, worrying that that much weight landing on the giant would awaken him. She put her hands up for Rufus to stop, and he did, looking up at her in confusion. But confusion was basically Rufus's primary trait, with curiosity like a close second. Though the latter was the reason he was so much larger than the other cats. If he hadn't leapt into the cauldron the last night had meant for Lena, the giant snorted loudly, disturbing his sleep for a moment, and turned his body enough to carry his arm out away from the table. Lena grabbed a hold of the tunic and held on tightly as the floor beneath her disappeared, leaving her several dozen feet off the floor. If the giant woke up now, that would be it. But his snoring returned to normal, and Lena let out a sigh of relief, at least until she heard the footsteps outside. The giant's wife. It had to be, and that meant Lena was out of time. She took a deep breath, then ran straight up the giant's arm, passing the elbow and leaping onto his chest. He'd moved his arm closer to his body, so the jump wasn't difficult, but she still landed harder than she'd have liked, and the giant mumbled something in his sleep. It's too late to worry about that now, though, so she forced herself to climb up toward his pocket, hand over hand, moving as quickly as she could. The footsteps outside drew closer, and she'd wonder if she'd make it to the treasure before the giant's wife reached the kitchen door. If she could just grab the item, she'd be home free, but that was still a big if. "Roral," said a voice from outside, "don't tell me you're sleeping again." The giant below Lena immediately sat up, almost tossing her off his tunic. "Of course not," he shouted back. "I was just cleaning the kitchen." Clinging to the giant's shirt, Lena knew she had at most mere seconds before he noticed her, and that meant she was out of time. With one last burst of strength, Lena threw herself toward the pocket, grabbing a hold of it with one hand, then falling neatly inside right as the front door opened, and the giant's wife appeared, one eyebrow raised. "That was the best you could do? Cleaning the kitchen?" she asked, shaking her head. "You have to make the lies believable." The giant laughed, shaking Lena around in his pocket. But she didn't let it stop her, not with her prize so close, because right next to her, inside the pocket, was the treasure she'd come for. She slowly reached for the enormous folded paper and pulled it open just enough to read from it. "And where is," the giant's wife started to ask, only to stop as a loud "Aha!" sounded from the giant's pocket. She looked at her husband. "I'm sorry, did you say something?" Two enormous fingers pinched the outside of the pocket and pulled it open just enough for the creature's giant eyes to peer down inside. "Oh, come on," the giant said, shaking his head. "Are you kidding me with this?" Lena held up the paper triumphantly in her hands, waving it at the giant. "Nice try, Dad," she shouted, "but I found the invitation and my name's on it. I knew I was invited to the ritual of the spark this year." So that's odd. Lena seems to be a giant, but she's much shorter than they are. It's almost like she's about thumb-sized, and her name is Lena. Thumb-sized Lena. I don't know what that's in reference to. Probably some sort of fairy tale. Let me read chapter 2, just so you get introduced to the second main character, because it wouldn't really be fair to leave him out. And then I will end for the day. Chapter 2. "Once upon a time, there was a great king," said the man draped in golden robes, his arms out dramatically as he stood before a gleaming yellow throne. No, not me, but that's nice of you to say." No one had said. But the assembled nobles all laughed politely up and down the enormous throne room, golden statues lining it on both sides. A brown-haired, ordinary-looking boy stood in the shadows at the side of the room, rolling his eyes as he wondered how long this was going to take. Jin hated being here, and not just because of how tacky the room was, with everything in it made entirely of gold. The nobles themselves provided the only contrast, forbidden as they were from wearing the king's color, so most were wearing silken fabrics in like silver tones or other rich colors, though none wore copper or bronze, as that might be too close and offend the king. The Golden King smiled benevolently down on his subjects. No, this king had 3 sons, each one more handsome and clever than the last, which of course means the youngest was the clear winner. He gestured at the 3 golden statues lined up behind the throne, and from a distance Jin could tell that the statues didn't look too thrilled. One was older, a middle-aged man, while the other 2 looked to be in their early 20s. But all had terrified expressions on their faces, and the 2 younger ones both had their arms up as if to defend themselves. Wanting to ensure that only the wisest of his children would lead, the king declared that whichever of his sons brought him an item of true power would be his rightful heir. The Golden King paused. Now we all know from stories that the youngest son will outwit the others. That's just how these things work. So true, your majesty, someone shouted out, and the king pointed at him, nodding. Indeed, the Golden King said, but stay with me here. So off these three princes went, searching the realm for items of true power, and years passed before they all returned. Finally, the three princes appeared before their aged father and presented their findings. Aged? Yeah. Jin sighed audibly. The king liked to make up holidays and anniversaries to celebrate himself, and today's celebration of the Golden King's family day was among the most boring yet. Jin opened his mouth to yawn widely, only to feel his lips close in mid-yawn. Annoyed, he threw a look at the Golden King, who had just closed the fingers on his right hand. That's my left hand. Silencing Jin. Ugh. Jin muttered some choice responses to himself, then nodded almost imperceptibly, and the magic keeping his lips closed disappeared. The Golden King flashed him a tiny smile, then went back to his speech. This was all so degrading. Was this honestly why he was here, to let humans humiliate him like this? Was that really what the elders wanted? And why humans? Jin squinted at the Golden King, looking down through the surface level to the light that all of his kind could see, the light of magic. It shone from any enchanted object or cast spell, but living creatures had their own kind of magic as well, and it tended to reveal their true nature, if you looked closely enough. With the Golden King, if there was any light, it was too faint to see, blocked as it was by shadows black as night. Moving his gaze around the hall, Jin found that the rest of the humans all had at least a spark of color inside them, all but the king. Great. Why had the worst human alive been the one to gain control over him? The oldest son, he brought back a darkness from a distant land, the king continued, smiling. Father, he said, the shadow magic can create fear wherever it goes, and there's nothing that rules better than fear. Someone clapped in the crowd, but the king threw them a look and they went silent. Perhaps, said his father, but let us see what your brothers brought. And then it was the turn of the middle brother, who showed off a ring, one containing a stone finer than any in the land. I don't know why I'm talking in this voice, but let's just go with it. Though the king didn't show the ring, Jin knew it was on his right finger, covered by a non-magical glove. Jin could feel its power. It was what gave the Golden King control over him, after all. This ring contains ultimate magic power, the middle brother said, and that is true strength, the ability to force others to bow before you. The assembled crowd cheered in response, and Jin clapped along loudly, wondering if the king would allow sarcastic applause. Apparently not, as Jin's hands stuck together on the second clap. He'd only been doing this whole serving humans to learn humility thing for just over a decade now, and it was already such a massive pain in his non-existent behind. It would have been slightly better if Jin could have just served that middle brother, at least, the one who'd actually found Jin's ring in some buried cave in a far-off land. But Jin had only granted one of that prince's wishes before the ring was... And finally, the youngest and most clever brother presented what we all know is the greatest power of all, said the Golden King, raising his glove and clenching it into a fist. His golden glove, sorry. For he had found wealth, the one thing that will motivate every human being. With the gold this youngest son could make from his newfound magical golden glove, he could rule the entire world. I really don't know what this voice is. The entire group of assembled nobles burst into applause, and for once, Jin wasn't sure if they were faking it or not for the king's approval. Of course the youngest son was declared the winner, the Golden King said, holding up both his hands now in triumph. Gold is the only true power. So the king declared this prince the rightful heir, as is the way of these stories, and granted him both his brother's findings as a gift. Jin threw a look at the prince's statues behind the throne again. The looks on their faces didn't look like they'd handed over anything voluntarily. And that was how I was meant to become ruler of these kingdoms, the king shouted excitedly, then paused for effect and sighed, shaking his head sadly. And I would have too, if the people hadn't decided out of the blue to no longer abide by the right of royalty to lead, and instead choose their own rulers. The crowd began to boo, and Jin joined in, only to have his mouth closed shut once more as the king seemed to realize where Jin's boos were directed. If nothing else, the Golden King was pretty insightful that way, Jin had to admit. Still, after that fairy queen's puppet messed everything up, the people did the proper thing and chose me to lead you, as it was always intended, the king continued, nodding magnanimously at his assembled subjects. And yet there are still those who object to my rule, like the last knight and his horrible rebels. Just as the words left his mouth, a blinding light appeared in the middle of the throne room. The crowd began to scream, and this time Jin half wanted to join in, considering the pain in his eyes. I shouldn't have even felt that, he wanted to yell, but that would just get him in more trouble with the Golden King. Oh, hello, said a voice from the middle of the light as it slowly dimmed, revealing a man in a glowing suit of silver armor, his helmet's visor down, concealing his face. I thought I heard my name? Is this the castle of the Golden King? He looked around a bit as the nobles backed away in fright. You know, gold's really not a sturdy building material. It's way too soft. I'd have recommended stone, honestly. You, the Golden King shouted, the last knight. The man in the silver armor bowed low. Nice to be recognized, even by His Highness the Ridiculous, the knight said, then stood back up. Now, if you don't mind, I'm here for the twins. Please bring them out to me, or I might get angry. Jin's magically created heart began to race, and he stepped forward in excitement. Finally, something interesting. He had no idea who these twins were, but the king complained about the last knight constantly. And if the rebel was here, in the throne room, this would be the perfect time to capture him. And if the king needed someone to capture, the last night, what better way than to make a wish? Jin rubbed his hands together in anticipation. There were just 2 wishes left, and then he'd be free of this horrible man. All in all, this whole genie thing was just such a giant pain. I gotta keep going because the next chapter is like that last line leads right into the next chapter. Chapter 3. Ow! The giant yelled in pain as Lena punched him in the thumb. You guys told me I wasn't invited, she yelled, giving her father a stern look as she punched his index finger now while he tried to fish her out of his pocket. My name's right there on the invitation. Seriously, that hurt, the giant said, looking to his wife for sympathy, but she just rolled her eyes. Oh, stop it, Roral, the woman said, shaking her head, then reached in and picked Lena up out of the pocket and placed her on the kitchen table. And you, what have I told you about hitting your poor father? Lena snorted. That's how true giants handle people who don't tell the truth. You know what the king says. Giants fight to show their might. She threw a few punches in the air while her father backed his chair away in fear. And you promised I could go to the ritual when I was invited. Why would you tell me I wasn't? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize we were revealing your secret to the whole village now, her mother replied, bending down to glare at Lena while raising an eyebrow. Lena sighed. We should. I'm just as much a giant as the rest of them. Yes, you are, her mother said. You're also 5 feet tall. 5.5, Lena said, which you can basically round up to 6. So a tenth the size of the other giants, her mother said, furrowing her brow, which told Lena she was about to get lectured again. Lena, you know how they feel about humans. I'm a giant, Lena shouted, stamping her foot and shaking the entire table below her. Not human. And yet, if they see someone your size, that's exactly what they'll assume you are, her mother continued. She could wear the growth ring, of course, her father pointed out, then slumped down even further in his chair after a dirty look from her mom. Yeah, see? Lena shouted, pointing at her dad. The growth ring. No one will even know. We've done it before, all exactly like every other giant. She certainly got the strength of one, her father said, holding his fingers tenderly. Both his wife and daughter raised an eyebrow at the giant. It hurts, okay? She's tougher than she looks. Lena rolled her eyes. You've been the one teaching me the traditional way to fight like a giant for the last 12 years, Dad. Now that I'm finally landing hits, you suddenly can't take it? She said, and swiped out at him again. This time he kicked back to avoid her hit, only to tip the chair over, sending him crashing into the firewood behind him. You're being so dramatic, her mother told her dad. Let her hit you next time and see how dramatic I'm being, her father said, picking himself off the floor. So this means I can go then, if I wear my growth ring? Lena said hopefully, looking up at her parents. She spent far too many years just watching them go off to the ritual of the spark, where giants came together from across the clouds to the castle of the king of giants. And now that she was finally old enough to go at age 12, she was beyond ready to go to be counted as a member of the village, along with the other giant children her age. This would be a good way to make friends with other giant kids, you know. A loud, indignant meow came a moment before something huge and furry slammed against her as Rufus rubbed his head against her back. Lena want friends? Rufus is Lena's friend. She laughed and scratched him. You'll always be my best friend, little man, she said as he purred loudly. But you want to come to the castle too, don't you? Rufus stared at her for a moment. This isn't the castle? No cats, her father yelled, cleaning up the firewood. There's no way you're bringing that thing to the ritual. We'll have enough trouble keeping you a secret. He trailed off, but Lena knew what he'd been about to say, and she felt a pang in her chest. Keeping you a secret. Hiding her height, how she looked like a human, in spite of being born to 2 giants. Hiding how unlike a true giant she was, how embarrassing she must be to her 2 giant parents. Roral, her mom shouted, and her dad's face turned red. We're not keeping you a secret, Lena. You know they just wouldn't understand. You look so human, and after what happened to the former king all those years ago, they're not the most forgiving. If you read Half Upon a Time, you know what happened to the first former king. Lena nodded, her brown hair falling over her face, only for Rufus to knock it back out of the way with another headbutt. I know that, but Her mother gave her father a long look, and after a pause, he seemed to recognize it was his turn to make the excuses. It's not about hiding you, Lena. We just don't know how they'd react. Only the king knows about your true size, and he's never been the most open-minded of giants. Even the growth ring isn't a permanent fix. She doesn't need a fix, her mother corrected him before turning to face Lena. You're the exact size you're meant to be. It's the others who have it all wrong. She looked away and was silent for a few moments before continuing. Still, you were invited, and maybe it'd cause more curiosity if you didn't come. Lena's eyes shot open. Wait, so I can really go? That's what you're saying? As much as she hated having to disguise who she was with the growth ring, the idea she could actually go to the ritual for the first time, the ritual that only giants could attend, made her forget everything else. Her mother smiled slightly. Only with the growth ring. Oh, and if you are bringing Rufus, you'll need to hide him. Oh, I will. I've got the collar that shrinks him down to my size, Lena shouted, patting the infinitely large pouch on her belt. Thank you, Mom! Her mother reached down and hugged her gently with two fingers, and Lena wrapped her arms around one of them, squeezing as tightly as she could. Ow! Hey, her mom yelled. That does hurt. See? Her father shouted. No one believes me until they see it for themselves. She's definitely a giant. Of course I'm a giant, Lena said, grinning widely. I'm just a compact one. I'm so excited! She turned and leapt on Rufus's back, not wanting to waste the time running back to her room in the tiny dollhouse her parents had made for her years ago, not when Rufus could get her there so much faster. There are going to be strict rules, you know, her mother yelled after her, but Lena didn't care. She knew there'd be all kinds of things she couldn't do or say, but that was fine. The most important thing was she was actually going to the ritual, the one that every other giant child went through at her age to become an official part of the village and receive their true last name, their epithet, like her father, Rural the Unburdened, or her mom, Cedra the Terrifying. Lena couldn't even imagine what name the Spark Tender would give her, but she knew it'd be a name only a true giant could live up to. Lena would touch the spark, just like the other giants, and get her name. And then finally, everyone would know who she really was, a true giant, just like they were. Look at this, she heard her father say from the other room, his voice booming. I think I'm bruising. All right, we'll do one more chapter. Chapter 4. You, the Golden King shouted the last night, his mouth dropping open. Guards, take him! Jin groaned. Guards? What a waste. Why didn't the king ask him instead? If he'd wished for it, Jin could have taken this knight down in a matter of moments, and the king would only have one wish left. But no, the Golden King had to hoard his wishes like some greedy sort of, person who turned his entire castle into gold. But still, the castle guards rushed toward the knight, their swords drawn. But the knight disappeared, reappearing just behind the king with his oddly translucent sword held out against the king's throat, a weird white glow coming from the weapon. I wouldn't do that if I were you, the knight said, nodding at the guards as the king shrieked in panic. Now, I think I asked about the twins. Would they be around? Or... Jin blinked, wondering how the man could possibly move so fast. He squinted at the knight, driving down beneath the surface to examine the magical light inside, but weirdly, there was nothing there, not even the black shadows of the king. He frowned. Something odd was happening here, and not just the knight's teleporting. Don't hurt me, the king shouted, trembling as the knight held him. Please, you can have anything you want. Is it gold? I can make you enough gold to last a lifetime. The knight released the Golden King with a disgusted snort. You really are just a worm, aren't you? He said. No, I don't care about your gold. Give me the twins and return the other rebels to me, and I'll allow you to live, apparently without any dignity, but still. As the guards surrounded the king once more, he sneered at the knight. You have no dignity, you! And now that we have you, I think it's time for you to join your friends in my statue collection. He's a little dramatic. He nodded at the side of the throne room where golden statues lined the wall opposite Jin. Jin looked over curiously, having never really examined the statues before, and realized for the first time how many of them looked just as surprised and terrified as the king's father and brothers behind the throne. The king was consistent, at least. You shouldn't keep them out in the open like this, the knight said, also looking at the statues. Those light-hearted words were offset by the dark tone in his voice. It's like you're daring me to steal them and turn my friends back. If only you had the power to do so, the king sneered. Get him, you fools! What do I pay you for? This time the knight didn't bother moving as the guards advanced, and instead opened his arms wide. The closest guard reached out to capture the knight, only for his hand to pass right through the rebel. Oh, I'm sorry, did I forget to mention I'm not actually here? The knight asked, shaking his head. Very forgetful of me. This does sort of make you wonder which of your nobles helped me get here, though. The king, his face contorted with rage, slowly turned toward the cowering nobles behind him. One of you helped the rebels? He whispered, his eyes widening. The nobles all began talking at once, a few even dropping to their knees to swear oaths that they'd done no such thing, but the king gestured, and half the guards surrounded the nobles, pushing them out of the throne room. When they were gone, the king turned back to the knight, his face red with rage. You You've embarrassed me for the last time, you little wretch. I'll send all of my faceless to find you, and there'll be nowhere you can hide, not even in the cursed city. The knight laughed. You think you can find the cursed city after all this time? Good luck with that. He turned away from the king, looking all around the room, and then seemed to notice Jin for the first time. Oh, who's that? A boy who's got smoke for legs? Jin gasped and looked down at his bottom half, realizing he'd forgotten about the magic that made him look human. Oh, sorry, he shouted at the knight and the Golden King. It's just a trick of the light. That's smoke from the torches. He quickly solidified himself to look fully human again, wincing as he knew he'd be paying for that once the knight was gone. The king's face looked even more angry at this, which Jin wouldn't have thought was possible. Enough of this nonsense. The twins are mine, he hissed, leaning towards the knight. And you shall never have them. I've got an entire castle full of faceless to guard them. But you will see them soon enough, once I've taken enough magic to build their power. Oh, so they are here, the knight said, nodding. Perfect. I figured you'd never keep them anywhere else, but I didn't want to do a whole elaborate break-in and find that you'd smartened up. That's good to know, and really all I needed, so I'll be on my way. But you're right. They'll be seeing me soon, as I'll be back when you least expect it. He began to disappear, waving goodbye at Jin. So nice. You're not going anywhere, you pathetic cretin, the king roared, now much braver without the knight actually in the room. The Golden King leapt forward again with his golden glove, but the knight was gone before the king reached him, leaving the king to stumble awkwardly, almost tripping on his long golden robes. Jin swallowed hard, wishing he hadn't just seen that. Without a word, the Golden King stood up, straightened his robes, then turned and grabbed Jin's arm as he passed, pulling him into the quiet of the adjoining hallway, and then to the king's waiting room. Off in the distance, Jin could hear the nobles yelling as the guards locked them away in rooms, which probably meant there were going to be a number of new statues in the throne room soon. But unfortunately, Jin knew the king would be dealing with him first. The Golden King's private rooms were, if anything, even more gaudy, as everything within was made of gold, from the walls to the furniture to the carpet. Again, pretty tacky in Jin's mind, and not at all comfortable either, so a lose-lose all around. Well, that was a surprise, Your Majesty, Jin said as the Golden King closed the door quickly behind them. Honestly, I think you could have taken him, if he'd really been there, obviously. He looked up at the king instantly. Or, if you'd like, you could always use a wish. Any attempt by the Golden King to appear calm disappeared the moment the door closed, and he stared at Jin for a moment, his fists clenched. My nobles betrayed me. The last night mocks me, and now you revealed one of my most powerful weapons to the enemy? Oh, right. I'm sure he didn't know what I actually am. There can't be that many genies in this world, since as far as I know, I'm the only one young enough to have to, serve humans. Still, if you want to make a wish, I'm sure I could. The Golden King sneered, then squeezed two fingers together in response, cutting off Jin's air. Jin's eyes widened, and he put his hands to his throat, but he knew it was useless. The king had absolute control over him, up to and including making him want to breathe in the first place, something genies didn't need to do naturally. Forcing him to draw in breath and keeping the air from reaching his lungs was just the kind of cruelty the king enjoyed. Not that Jin could suffocate, even when in human form, because if he fell unconscious, he'd just revert back to his gaseous spirit state. But not breathing definitely wasn't comfortable in the meantime, and then the king could make him feel like he might die, even if that wasn't possible. You seem to forget which of us is in control, the Golden King said quietly. Now, are you done with your jokes? I would think a little respect might be in order, considering. Jin gritted his teeth, but nodded, hating having to do it. King kept his fingers pressed together for another moment, only to abruptly release them. Air came flooding back into Jin's lungs, and he gasped, then took a deep breath, just enjoying the feeling, not caring if it was real or not. The king looked down at the lower half of Jin's body. If not for the last night's attack, the court might have noticed your legs were missing. Do that again, and I'll punish you for real. Jin nodded again and glanced down himself to make sure the legs hadn't gone anywhere. The king insisted on keeping him around just in case of danger, instead of letting Jin relax inside the ring like the king's brother had. But that meant Jin had to disguise himself as human to hide his natural form, which was basically an intangible spirit that looked kind of like a cloud of smoke. Originally, Jin had chosen what he thought was a fairly handsome form, giving himself all kinds of muscles and appealing features, but the king had immediately shut that down and forced him to instead look completely forgettable, which did work in that most humans in the castle barely even noticed Jin was there. His dark brown pants, gray shirt, and thin gray hooded cape helped with that, though Jin was just glad not to have to wear gold, honestly. The last night has gone too far this time, the king said, pacing around as Jin finished looking himself over. Up until now, he's just been an annoyance, interfering too often as I dealt with the magical threats to my people. But now he means to take the twins back? That will not happen. Jin opened his mouth to ask who the twins were, but decided this wasn't the best time for questions and shut his mouth instead. Besides, the king sounded like he was about to do just what Jin wanted him to do anyway, so the last thing he wanted to do was distract the man. For my second wish, genie, the king said, turning back to glare at Jin, I want you to capture the last knight from the cursed city and bring him here to me in chains. And there it was. Finally, the second wish. Just one more and Jin would be free. He tried to hide his excitement as he bowed low. It shall be done, your majesty. And it would be too, no matter what it took. All Jin had to do was figure out, well, how to do it, considering how little magic he actually had. Chapter 5. Lena happily looked herself over in the giant-sized hand mirror her mother had given her, taking up one entire wall of the dollhouse bedroom. She so rarely had clothes she liked, since everything her parents had provided had come from dolls. Of course, once she discovered the human city on the ground below the clouds, that had all changed, but she couldn't let her parents know that. While the other giants would be getting dressed up for the ritual, Lena knew she couldn't wear anything too fancy, not without her mother wondering where she'd gotten the clothing from. But she wasn't going to wear some ill-fitting doll clothing either, so she compromised by wearing one of the more giant-looking, human-made outfits she discovered, satisfied that at least it fit. And the magic of the growth ring would ensure it grew along with her, so that was helpful too. As she checked to make sure she'd belted her tunic correctly, the mirror began to mist over and Lena frowned. Not this again. That was the trouble with trying to use magic mirrors to dress yourself. You will meet the love of your life very soon, the mirror said in a spooky voice. Lena rolled her eyes. Oh, yeah? She said, glancing over at Rufus behind her. If he's not better than my cat, I don't really care. The mirror snorted. Hey, no one's making any claims about him being better than anyone. I'm just making prophecies here. Well, you don't have to, Lena told it. I'm trying to get ready. Could you maybe just stop for now and tell me all about this guy later? Oh, come on. You never let me do anything fun, the mirror said, and a face began to appear inside the glass. A boy's face with brown hair. Lena groaned and immediately looked away, not wanting to see anything more. If this was some giant boy she was going to meet later today at the ritual, then great. If otherwise, she didn't really even care anyway. There are far more important things to worry about than boys. All right, stop, Lena said, trying to sound firm. Don't just go showing me some guy when I said I wasn't interested. I'm busy. He's not some guy, the mirror complained. He's the one you'll spend the rest of your life with happily ever after. Ever after what? She asked, checking her belt. What does that even mean? Not really sure, honestly, the mirror admitted. It's just part of the prophecy. Ever is probably like forever, I imagine, so maybe you'll love him after forever? Sure, let's go with that, Lena said, tightening her belt and turning to leave. I'll love him after forever is over. Deal. Ooh, looks like he's a bad boy and will be on the other side of... Hey, wait, the mirror shouted, but she'd already walked out. Rufus right behind her. Even if Lena hadn't had to hurry, the mirror's ridiculous prophecies were the last thing she needed to worry about. It was always trying to predict her future one way or another, and while it was usually right, including the time she discovered the mountain poking through the clouds just a few miles outside town and ended up falling down it to find the human city below, just as he'd predicted. It still didn't exactly help to know that ahead of time. Inevitably, what she wanted them to know, whether she wanted them or not, inevitably, whether she wanted to know them or not, the prophecies came true. So why bother with them? And she had enough on her mind at the moment anyway. She was going to the ritual and finally be an official part of the village. Would that be the time to remove the growth ring and show them all her true self? A shiver of fear went down her spine at the thought of all the other giants staring down at her in surprise. Maybe not just yet, but soon. And they'd have to accept her if she had her epithet, as long as it wasn't Lena the Short or Lena the Tiny. Wait, that wouldn't be her name, would it? She could see it now, the spark tender seeing through to her true self and declaring her Lena the Small. Rufus slammed into her from behind, and she realized she'd stopped in place while worrying about what was to come. What was she doing? She couldn't let her fear get her down, not today of all days. Stepping outside her dollhouse, she moved just enough to give herself plenty of room to grow, then pulled out the growth ring. Rufus sniffed at it, recognizing what it was instantly. Lena grow big? Rufus said, nuzzling her with his fuzzy face. I come with Lena? She beamed and turned to scratch Rufus behind the ears, knowing he hated being left at home alone. Of course you're coming, she said. I'm going to put your collar on to make you small, though, okay? That way I can hide you. He purred, his eyes closed as she scratched. The collar is bad, but I come, so I wear collar. I'm a good boy. She almost lost it when he called himself a good boy, as usual, but she pulled his collar from her pouch. The collar was just another magical relic her parents had traded for it entirely for Rufus. She slid it over his head, then tightened it gently around his neck, making sure it wasn't too loose or too constricting. Then she closed the clasps, and immediately Rufus shrank down to the size of an earthbound cat, just like the ones that humans kept as pets. and the same size as he was when Lena had first met him. She shrieked in joy as she always did and picked him up, cuddling him closer. I love when you're this size, she shouted, and he purred loudly even as he pushed away from her, not liking to be so constrained. Lena, let me go now, he said, his tails whapping her stomach, his tail, not tails plural, whapping her stomach as he twitched it with annoyance. Lena, get big and not forget me? I'd never, she said, hugging him one more time. Lena, her father yelled from the kitchen, you almost ready? Just getting big, Dad, she shouted back and put Rufus up on her shoulder, then readied herself to put on the growth ring. Part of her felt so wrong doing this, hiding her true size, her true self from the other giants. But it wouldn't be for much longer. As soon as everyone knew, then she'd never have to wear the horrible thing ever again. She took a deep breath, then slipped the ring on her finger and shot into the air too fast to even comprehend as she grew 50 feet instantly. The whole room spun around her, woo, as it always did after such a huge shift in height, and she almost fell over before reaching out to steady herself against the wall. Lena is okay, Rufus said from her shoulder, almost too small to hear. At this size, he was basically the size of a small coin to her. So, not wanting him to get lost, she reached out and gently stuck him behind her ear, where he could see everything, and better yet, she could hear him, just in case she needed, some support. Are you comfortable there? She asked. I am so tall, Rufus said, purring again, and she laughed, wanting to pet him, but worrying she might hurt him. You're almost always taller than me, she told him with a grin, then left to go meet her parents. As she stepped into the kitchen, her mom froze. Where did you get that outfit? Oh, great. Her mother was way too observant. Just picked it up somewhere. Her father looked over, frowning. Is it new? I swear all her clothes look the same. Her mother rolled her eyes, then moved in closer to Lena. Where did you get that? She repeated, whispering this time. I traded for it, Lena said, not able to look her mother in the eye. It wasn't a lie, but she hoped her mother would think she meant with another giant. We're going to be late, her dad said, nodding up at the sun giant who just passed by them, waving at their village like he always did as he carried the giant flaming orb across the sky. If we don't get there soon, we're going to get bad seats. Coming, Lena said, and pushed past her suspicious mother. You and I are going to have a long talk when we get home, her mother whispered as her father waved them on from outside their cottage, which looked far smaller at the moment than it usually did to Lena. Sounds good, Lena said, cringing, but now wasn't the time to worry about future lectures. Instead, she focused on what was to come and what amazing name she might get. Lena the Brave, Lena the Strong. Lena the Perpetually Grounded was probably the more likely one, but even that she'd take if it meant finally getting to be a part of the giant village and not having to hide in her own house. Everyone ready? Her father asked, completely oblivious to Lena's nervousness and her mother's suspicion. Great! This is going to be fun. Chapter 6. From what Jin could tell, being a genie was supposed to be fun. And he supposed it was, for the elders, the Ifrits. After all, they had access to all the real magic, the kind that could create worlds or, end them. But for young genies like Jin, the ones the elders wanted to torture and punish until they learned humility of all useless things, they only had a fraction of the power they'd have access to later, after their 1,050 years of service. And given that he'd only been born 12 years ago, Jin still had a long way to go. Not to mention that the whole service thing was absolutely filled with rules, all of which just punished good, decent, hard-working genies like Jin. Like how the human who held a specific control device, in Jin's case his ring, could make 3 wishes and Jin had to fulfill them, no matter how long it took or what he had to do to make the wish come true. It was an unbreakable rule, at least at his current power level. And not only that, the rule said that the ring bearer could also punish Jin if he misbehaved in any way, but didn't even say what misbehaving really was. So if you had a horrible human holding your control device, like, say, the Golden King, he could punish you for doing just about anything he didn't like, and apparently the Ifrits were totally okay with that. Completely unfair. It also didn't help that Jin was like the first new genie in a few millennia, so the Ifrits were being extra careful around him, not giving him access to any good magic. In fact, all he could really do was change his own body however he wanted, which was magic like that every genie had, and teleport himself wherever he wanted. And that was it. So much for the all-powerful genies. Granted, okay, the elders claimed they had their reasons. Apparently the last genie they tried to teach humility had just faked it, then almost destroyed an entire universe over some issues with a mirror and a fairy queen or two. That's from Half Blown Time. So now Jin was just stuck beneath the thumb of this golden dictator, punished whenever it was even the slightest bit snarky, all because some genie had a temper tantrum. Basically, no one suffered like Jin, and the Ifrits needed to feel sorry for him and therefore change the rules so he could have all their power early. There was really no other option. He did at least have something else going for him. Knowledge. Big, cosmic knowledge that could tell him the age of a star or how long it took for a diamond to form beneath a dragon, given the proper materials. But again, the elders in all their wisdom didn't want him figuring out how to use that knowledge to access the magic that was his birthright early, so they'd restricted his access to the knowledge too. At least it was still there, just in a much more annoying way. All I'm asking is where I can find this last night person, Jin said to the cosmic knowledge, floating around in the Golden King's personal chamber, the king now having gone to turn the various nobles, as well as the guards who'd seen his humiliation, into golden statues. Jin figured the last night had probably found his own way in and was just causing chaos by suggesting the nobles had done it, something Jin could appreciate. But considering the king wouldn't let anyone see him embarrassed, that might not have even mattered. It shouldn't be that hard, he shouted. Oh, it wouldn't be, the cosmic knowledge said in his head. Not if you had your full power, but that would hardly teach you humility, would it? Jin gritted his teeth, the ones he only had so that humans wouldn't find out that their king had access to a genie. Where's your humility, huh? I don't hear you talking about how we should all be peaceful trees or something. Is that what you think humility is? Maybe we need to start with definitions. Jin let out a frustrated growl. You helped me in the first wish, didn't you? What's changed? For the first wish, we told you about the series of difficult tasks it would take to fulfill the wish, and you succeeded in every one, Jin said. You ignored us and instead fulfilled the Golden King's wish with a series of clever, if completely immoral, tasks. The cosmic knowledge continued. Oh, look who's suddenly so judgmental. Just because they know everything in the universe, Jin said, rolling his eyes as he flopped down onto a long, thin couch that turned out to be even more uncomfortable than it looked. I got him voted into the chancellorship, and that's what he wished for. All I had to do was start, a few rumors, spy on a few people, and generally cheat in every way I could. None of which exhibited any humility whatsoever. Oh, I'm so sorry. How exactly was I supposed to do that? By admitting that the task was beyond you and that you needed help. I asked you for help. But you could have asked any number of humans. Fairy queens, elves, dwarves. Jin waved his hands. All right, enough. I get it. So if I ask for help this time, you'll see that I'm incredibly humble and give me all my magic then, right? That's all I need to do? No, young Jin, the cosmic knowledge said. To know you are humble, we must see you put someone else before yourself. If you wish to be free of service before your 1,050 years are up, you must perform a truly selfless act. A what? Jin shouted. His voice must have been louder than he thought as a guard opened the door and looked around, then shut it, but not before giving Jin an odd glance. A what? He said more quietly now. There's no such thing. Even though I tried to do something selfless now, you'd know I was just doing it to get my magic, so it'll never work. Put others before yourself, and you will see that selflessness is not only possible, but perhaps a way to find a new kind of magic. Jin gagged, shaking his head. If you tell me that love or friendship is the real magic, I'm going to set fire to this whole world. Fine. Selfless act. I'll be on the lookout for one. Now, will you help me with this wish? I have to complete this one and a third before I get my freedom because someone thought 3 wishes was a much better idea than 1. Go to the cursed city, as the Golden King said. You will find everything and everyone you need there to fulfill this wish. Jin blinked. Oh, thank you for being so helpful. I thought my cosmic knowledge might be able to tell me where exactly to find this last night, but no, you shared the one piece of information I already had. Incredibly useful. The knowledge went silent for a moment, then sounded like it coughed. It might be that this last night is somehow eluding us. I'm finding it difficult to locate him, in fact. Jin's eyebrows shot up. He's... what? How could some human hide from all the knowledge in the universe? That would be a good question to ask him. There are ways, powerful enchanted items, some of which were well known on this world. There's something called the Sword of an Eye that could potentially hide him. It would be a translucent sword with a sort of glowing white light inside, just like the one that the last night... Of course, a human thought to put a hiding spell on a random sharp object, Jin said, shaking his head. They're all just so angry and violent. Anyway, I don't need any more excuses. I'll just have to find him myself instead of asking for help like a humble person does. But sure, I'll go to the cursed city, maybe go door to door until he shows up. Because why have all the knowledge in the world when it's easier to just ask everyone if they've seen the guy? Perhaps you should keep in mind that the last night implied the cursed city would be hard to find. Perhaps you should keep in mind that one of the few magical powers the Ifrits let me have is to teleport places, Jin said, shaking his head. So I don't need to find it, I just need to magic myself there. Again, the cosmic knowledge went silent for a moment, then changed the subject, which made sense since Jin had just completely outwitted it about the whole cursed city thing. Remember, young genie, that while you might not be in any danger, your actions can hurt those around you. Be mindful of not only the one you serve, but the other... Yeah, the other humans got it, Jin said, nodding quickly. You act like I set fire to all the other candidates for the chancellorship or something. It was only some, and none of them were even permanently hurt. He frowned. Well, that one wooden guy lost a toe, but that was only because he ran from the dragon, which he wasn't supposed to. Dragons can't resist a hunt. Everyone knows that. The voice in his head sighed. Not a great sign from the sum total of all cosmic knowledge. Just try not to mess this up, please. Your actions could literally doom this entire world, Jin. Jin rolled his eyes. All right, enough. I'm just going to teleport to this cursed city place, wherever that is, find this human, and carry him back here. Should be easy enough, even without your help. Not waiting for a response, Jin used his magic to teleport to the cursed city, disappearing in a burst of smoke. When the smoke cleared on the other end, Jin expected to find himself in the middle of a city, most likely cursed, with buildings, people, regular sorts of city things. Instead, there was no city here, wherever he was. Instead, he found himself in the middle of a clearing, surrounded by dozens of knights in full armor, their helmet visors open and empty. The faceless. No one knew what they were or how empty armor could move around on its own, but they were legitimately the creepiest and most feared soldiers of the Golden King. And now here they all were, aiming their black swords at Jin. How'd the teleporting go? The cosmic knowledge asked. Did it work out just as you thought it would? Everything go as planned? Is this the city? Oh, be quiet, Jin thought, then turned to the faceless. Well, hey, look at all you, having no faces and everything. So, has anyone seen a cursed city around here? All right, that will be all we read for now. We're almost at page 50, which is, I think, a good place to stop. I might read a few more chapters. We'll see. I want to leave. We all love cliffhangers, so I might leave you on one of those. For now, I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.